So right now this is being recorded, right?
Do you want to have a recording of this?
Maybe yes. If
yeah.
so.
I think,
but
this is automatically recorded.
Yeah. So, it is
yeah.
being recorded.
If you don't like.
No. I'm fine with that. Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. It's okay. Or should I? Okay, so maybe. Okay.
So to start, so everyone, Happy New Year. I hope you had a great winter break. Today's seminar is given by Professor Hun. Your family name is called Chung?
Chung.
Hun Chung. Professor Hun Chung at Waseda University. He is well known as a formal political theorist who has many publications in major journals. Today's talk is based upon one of the publications titled When Utilitarianism Dominates Justice as Fairness. So please get started, Professor Chung.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for this opportunity to present my work in this seminar. So this is basically a paper that is already like published online. It doesn't have a specific issue that has been assigned yet, but it's like published online in economics and philosophy. So I'll basically start this presentation here. All right, so let me start. So we are, I guess like everybody in this seminar is pretty much familiar with like the original position type of like arguments of how like John Rawls, the debate between John Rawls and John Harsanyi and stuff like that and how people use the original position as a device to justify principles of distributive justice. So basically we can see here that so many people, many political philosophers have used the original position to justify the principles of justice. And the basic assumption here is that principles of distributive justice are justified, basically to the extent that it would be shown that they would be the outcome of a fair and impartial agreement made by rational agents in a suitably defined hypothetical original position. So that's kind of the basic device. And basically what justifies the resulting principle is basically the agreement made by rational parties that are situated in the rational, the original position, right? And many people have basically tried to show that if you kind of like, what they basically did was that they tried to justify that the parties in the original position would be justified in using this kind of like normative decision rule. And when they use this kind of like specific normative decision rule, that will lead to this kind of like principle of justice and so forth, right? So most of the debate that if you have followed it have centered around which normative decision rule it would be reasonable for the parties in the original position to adopt in making their decisions, right? So for example, Rawls says that in the basic circumstances and the conditions of the original position, make it rational for the parties to adopt what's called the maximum rule, which requires the parties to basically assume for each option the worst possible case and maximize the worst possible case possible. And from this, Rawls argued that the resulting theory of justice would basically be justice as fairness, right? And Harsanyi, on the other hand, said that he disagreed with Rawls in using maximin as a normative decision rule. Instead, he said that we should use this expected utility maximization, right? By assigning equal probabilities of each kind of like potential like birthplaces that each parties can potentially be born into, and then kind of like make the expectation and maximize that. And that would basically lead to, according to Harsanyi, what's called like average utilitarianism. And recently there are like two other people like Laura Buchek and Stephenson, who also kind of like said that, oh, there are these other kinds of like normative decision rule, which also kind of like results in some other kind of like principle of distributive justice. Like Buchek says that if you kind of like use risk-weighted expected utility maximization instead of just simple expected utility maximization, it kind of like basically results in what she calls a weight weighted reg utilitarianism. Stephenson says that if we assume that parties are ambiguity averse, right? So they do not they dislike the fact that they don't know the probabilities and so forth. And this kind of like, if you kind of like assume that distribution, it results in what's called a distribution sensitive utilitarianism, right? So here, from this, like we can see that depending on which normative like decision rule the parties are assumed to adopt, we can see that it results in different principles of justice, right? So from this, Stephenson basically said that since the veil of ignorance argument is so sensitive to subtle modeling choices, the argument does not settle the debate between the main competing views and distributive ethics, right? So it depends, highly depends on which normative decision rule you think is plausible for the parties in the original position to adopt, right? So if that is the case, then this is kind of like the strategy of the paper. And the strategy of the paper is that one way to advance the debate might be to specify the conditions under which one particular principle of justice, say utilitarianism, outperforms all other principles of justice in all relevant aspects, so that it emerges as the uniquely rational choice, regardless of the particular normative decision rule employed. All right, so wait a second, I'll just try to. So like this would be the same. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. I'll use this screen because it's too same. So basically, the aim of this paper is that in this paper, I will argue that under conditions that are both reasonably realistic and consonant with Rawls, utilitarianism Pareto dominates Rawls's two principles of justice, which means that it is better. Utilitarianism results in a better result, a better outcome for everybody, which also includes like the least advantaged members in society, right? So it also basically means that utilitarianism will turn out to better protect the interests of the least advantaged members of society, which means that it serves better the main purpose that Rawls designed his two principles of justice better than his own principles, right? So if this is actually so, then we can then bypass the issue concerning which normative decision rule it would be most reasonable for the parties in the original position to adopt, as the parties can now simply rely on what I call the principle of dominance, which is directly implied by instrumental rationality to choose utilitarianism, okay? So here, unlike the other kind of like work that has been published in the debate of the original position, rather than taking a single person decision theoretic approach, which has traditionally been the main standard approach employed in the literature, in this paper, I will take an economic approach to directly model the basic structure and the economic agents therein to project the economic consequences and social outcomes of the basic structures prescribed either by Rawls's two principles of justice or utilitarianism to inform the parties of their choices of principles of distributive ethics in the original position. Okay. All right. So I will now kind of like basically introduce what I call the principle of dominance, right? So if you kind of like think of it, neither maximin or expected utility maximizations are directly implied by instrumental rationality, right? They are plausible only under specific like conditions and so forth, right? So for example, maximin is rational. Like there were specific conditions that Rawls actually like proposed that he thought made it rational. So even Rawls, although he thought that the original contracting parties will rely on maximin, he did not think that maximin is generally a reasonable or a rational decision rule that applies to any kind of circumstances, right? The maximin rule is plausible to adopt only under specific conditions. So he basically presented like three basic conditions. And the first condition was that there's no reliable basis to estimate probabilities. So if you don't know probabilities, you cannot like take expectations, right? The second is that what is guaranteed by the maximin rule is pretty good, right? And that was the second condition. And in the third condition, any other option, if you choose something other than the maximin rule, there are possibilities in which you will fall way below the minimum that is guaranteed by the maximin rule. So under these like three circumstances, Rawls basically thought that it would be rational to adopt maximin rule. And he thought that the original position exemplified those three like specific conditions that made it rational. So the rationality is not, the rationality of maximin is not like directly implied by instrumental rationality. It's only rational to adopt maximin under the specified circumstances, and that is even like what Rawls acknowledges. And the same thing holds for expected utility maximization, right? So in order to think that expected utility maximization would be a rational decision rule, you would have to also assume like many things, right? It would have to assume that the parties are sort of like risk neutral, right? Over what the expectation is like being taken over and so forth, right? So basically, we might think that, you know, in order for maximin to be rational, you have to be like risk averse. You have to be risk neutral to make you expect the utility maximization like reasonable and so forth. So neither principle is a direct implication of instrumental rationality. They are only reasonable under like specified circumstances. But right, so it's only under specified. However, what I want to say is that there does exist a normative decision rule, which is directly implied by instrumental rationality and whose plausibility is independent of the specific circumstances, right? And that is what's called the principle of dominance, right? So according to the principle of dominance, it says that you have a choice between two options, X and Y. And if option X dominates option Y, in the sense that if X generates outcomes that are no worse than Y, in all possible states, in every possible state, X is better, or at least not worse. And some states generates outcomes that are strictly better than Y, the instrumental rationality requires one to choose X over Y, right? So it would simply be foolish not to choose Y if X gives you a better, no worse outcome in every circumstances and a better, strictly better outcome in some circumstances, right? And this doesn't rely on one's attitudes towards risk attitudes or anything like that, right? So basically, this is, I think, uncontroversial. It's an implication of instrumental rationality, right? And of course, there is limits for this principle, right? Although it's uncontroversial, the application, it's very hard to apply this principle because once we rule out options that are obviously bad, right, and unworthy of consideration, there tend to be fewer remaining cases in which one option clearly dominates another option, right? So although it's uncontroversial, you cannot really like use it when you're kind of making these kind of like decisions, because usually the most important decisions involve like trade-offs, right? This option is good in this aspect, but bad in that aspect, while the other option is good in that aspect. So no option strictly dominates the other option, right? So the principle is rather limited in its applicability, but under the situation when the principle does apply, I think there's no like controversy on that we should apply. If some option clearly dominates another option, I don't think there's a question of why we should not, you know, choose the dominant option, right? So the point is that if there does exist one dominant option, even after eliminating obviously bad options that are unworthy of consideration, then it would just be plainly instrumentally irrational not to choose it, right? So furthermore, this is true independent of one's particular assumptions concerning knowledge of probabilities or risk attitudes, right? So if one option dominates another option, you don't need to know like the probabilities of each kind of like possible state occurring, because, you know, you already know that one option is better, right, than the other. So it doesn't, the plausibility of the principle of dominance does not depend on the specific circumstances or the assumptions regarding the agent's attitudes towards risk and so forth, right? So the main strategy of the paper is this. Suppose that it turns out that the economic consequences generated by a basic structure organized by utilitarianism, Pareto dominates, both in terms of people's welfare, right? And that is, welfare is basically what utilitarians care about, but also in terms of the index of primary goods, right? And that is kind of like the thing that Rawlsians care about, right? It's the index of primary goods, right? And so if Pareto dominates in both kind of like aspects of measurement of like advantage or well-being, then those generated by a basic structure by then a Rawls's difference principle, then not only can it be claimed that the parties in the original position will choose utilitarianism over Rawls's difference principle on the basis, not on maximin or the principle of expected utility maximization, but on the basis of the principle of dominance, right? which requires no probabilistic information for its application. Right? But the force of the criticism that utilitarianism does not take seriously the separateness of distinct persons will also be significantly diffused because nobody's interest can be said to be sacrificed for the sake of achieving the greater good or of society as a whole, because by utilitarianism, you're basically improving everybody. Nobody is being sacrificed for the greater outcome, a greater total well-being of everybody, right? So in my original paper, I also kind of like had a kind of like a separate section that I kind of like argued in detail of talking about the separateness of persons' objections and do it that. But in this like talk, I will kind of like bypass that issue and kind of like focus on the other kind of like results more. So, but the main point is that, you know, if we kind of like follow the basic model and the results of the paper, utilitarianism no longer is the target of the separateness of persons objection, because it simply makes everybody well off, better off than Rawls's difference principle. So here, all right, so here's the model of the thing. So here are some preliminaries. We're assuming that there are two groups. There's a group called MAG, which is short for the more advantaged group, and a group called LAG, which is short for a less advantaged group. And these are the two groups that Rawls actually like uses in his books, right? And Rawls, there are like several places where Rawls sort of like uses simple kind of like models to illustrate his points, and he uses MAG and LAG, right, for simplified purposes. So it's basically a two-person or two-group model. So the members of MAG and LAG both have, we're going to assume that physical needs and psychological capabilities that are, what, how do I, okay, within the normal range, okay? So basically, that's the normality assumption. So basically, yeah, so that's what Rawls basically says, right? So what this rules out is that there's nobody, nobody who's disabled or handicapped when we're talking about that. And the reason why Rawls kind of like made this assumption is that he thought that principle of justice should regulate how to distribute things that have been produced by social cooperation, right? So so he thought that, of course, we have a sort of like a duty to help like the handicapped, the disabled people, but that is not a matter of justice, right? It's a matter of like some like charity or something like that. And the matters of like what the principles of justice regulate is how to divide the social cooperative like surplus that have been generated by people's cooperation. And in order for each person to be a member of social cooperation, he had to assume that people's physical and psychological capacities are all normal, which enable them to become full participants of social cooperation, which then he can rely on principles reciprocity to kind of like argue for his difference principle, right? So here, basically the parties reflect this by assuming that both MAG and LAG share the same utility functions for income and wealth, which according to Rawls serves as the first approximation. So it's a proxy, right? So Rawls thinks that the thing that must be distributed and to which his difference principle, which requires to maximize the least advantage, the advantage of the least advantage, the thing that the difference principle applies towards is primary goods, right? The index of primary goods, right? And he says that the index of primary goods, like primary goods includes like income, wealth, like rights or freedom or stuff like that. And primary goods are basically instrumental goods, right? It's the type of goods that any rational man would want, if possible, want more, to regardless of the particular like conception of the good that he wishes to pursue, right? But since there, of course, in Rawls's theory, there are multiple primary goods, but for these kind of like modeling purposes, there are places where he says that, of course, I'm assuming that there are many primary goods, but let's just kind of like just focus on income, like money, right? And kind of like use that as a proxy or it approximates what he says, a first approximation of the index of primary goods one enjoys, right? So that kind of like then solves the sort of like the problem of what's called the indexing problem of whether it is possible to kind of like, you know, assign numbers in a way that represents the order of bundles of primary goods people enjoy, right? And you can kind of like, the index is basically then identified as simply the amount of money, right? The person enjoys more primary goods if the person, the bundle of money that he or she receives is higher, right? So you can kind of like do that. So following Rawls's Rawls actually presented what he called a normatively constructed utility function. And this comes out in many, I think many people do not like recognize this, but this comes out in Justice as Fairness. Like what page was it? I forgot. But Rawls basically says that this is how people's utility function should look like. So it's kind of like, he said that, oh, I'm not saying that people's utility functions look like this. It's not an accurate like description of how people's utility function are, but it is normatively, it's constructed for the normative purpose of justifying principles of justice in the original position, right? So you can see here, the basic characteristic is that, here the horizontal line is basically the index of primary goods, and basically the vertical axis is welfare or utility, right? And you can see like, it says like basic structures, right? But here, the reason why it says basic structures is that A, G, B are kind of like the basic possible structures that would guarantee this amount of like primary goods, right? So basically what he's saying that here in G, this is like an institution where the difference principle is applied, right? So you're guaranteed, this is the guaranteed level of like sort of like primary goods under the difference principle according to Rawls. And A and B are basically the two possible cases when society basically implements utilitarianism, right? When things goes well, you might kind of like end up with B. But if things do not go well, you kind of like basically are born into a worse off like group, you're going to get A and stuff like that. But the thing is, you kind of like look at like the specific way Rawls kind of like depicted the curvature. It says like the utility, welfare, increases rapidly right before this point, B, right? And after this B, it kind of like just like gets flattened out, right? So it is like strictly concave, but it kind of like goes like this. So it kind of like tries, that's kind of like the main point of Rawls is like utility function. So you can see that it is strictly concave. So we're going to assume that this is basically the utility function for income for MAG, MAG's utility function for MAG. So, and this is going to be denote like LAG's utility function for income. And we're going to assume that both of them are strictly concave. And specifically to kind of like, make our computations more simple, we're going to simply assume that the utility that each MAG and LAG receives by a given income X is going to be the square root of X, okay? And square root is kind of like a function that looks like this, right? Over income. Okay, so we're going to now add like a production into the model. So MAG and LAG are each endowed with, we're going to assume like T hours of freedom or leisure time, and they're going to use a proportion. So they have time, and they're going to decide the amount of time that they allot to engage in productive activity, okay? So we're going to use like here, L, right? LM is going to denote MAG's working time. LL is going to denote LAG's working time. And then MAG and LAG's productives are going to be represented by the following income functions, right? So here, XM is going to be the income of MAG. XL is going to be the income of LAG. And it's a function of their labor, their working time. And you can see that their income is basically proportional to the amount of working time that they spend. But we can see that there's beta. There's beta, and beta is like greater than one. So basically with a given amount of labor, basically MAG is going to earn beta times more income than LAG, right? So beta here is going to represent MAG's relative productive advantage when LAG's productivity is normalized to 1, right? So basically, whenever LAG earns this amount of like LL uses LL as his or her labor to earn LL amount of income, MAG is going to basically earn beta times more than if he spends the same labor, okay, right? So this is how, or okay, so income then working time. So here, given the time, working time, the labor of mag and lag, also mag and lag's utility function for not their income, but leisure, right? So they also care about like their leisure are going to be as follows. So they have a total time T and they're going to subtract the amount of working time. And that's going to be like the remaining time of their leisure is going to also kind of like feed into their utility function. So from this, mags and lags total well-being is going to be a sum of the welfare they receive from their income plus the welfare they receive from their leisure, right? So it's going to kind of like look like this, right? So basically, it's the square root of their income, and the income is the function of their labor plus their leisure, which is the total time that they have minus the time that they spend in working. Okay. So suppose that the parties in the original position are concerned about choosing principles of justice that determine the society's basic structure, right? They choose principle of justice. The principle of justice is going to determine the basic structure of their society, and the basic structure of their society is going to determine their redistributive tax rate, okay? And the redistributive tax rate is going to be T. So the assumption is redistributive taxes are going to be levied, imposed solely on mag's income, and then the amount that is gets collected by the government is going to be transferred to lag, right? And that's why the tax is redistributive taxes. Okay, so given that mag and lag spend LM and LL, their after-tax income is going to be like this, right? So if mag spends LM, amount of labor, right? He's going to earn beta times LM, amount of income. But from his earned income, the government is going to impose a tax, T, to mag's income, right? So he's going to, the government is going to collect beta T LM, right? Which is, where's the, yeah. Beta T LM, and they're going to, so this is taken from mag's income, and after the government collects this, the government is going to transfer this to lag. So lag's after-tax income is going to be after lag uses LL. This is the amount of income that lag earns for himself, but beta TLM is going to be the government subsidy, right? That the government kind of gives to lag by collecting taxes from lag, okay? Okay. So we're going to follow Rawls and assume that mag and lag are mutually disinterested, right? So mag and lag will be assumed to choose their working time so that they don't care about the other group, right? So they choose the optimal like working time so that they strike the optimal work and leisure balance that maximizes their own total well-being. So we're assuming that people under this system are going to choose the amount of time that they work to maximize their own total well-being, okay? Given the specific redistributive tax rate, T, imposed by the basic structure of that society, right? So that's kind of like the setup. So the problems that then utilitarianism and Rawls's difference principle tries to solve can be summarized as follows. Utilitarianism will basically prescribe a basic structure and its corresponding redistributive tax rate. And we're going to use T star U as the utilitarian redistributive tax rate so that the basic sum total of max and lag's welfare level is maximized, okay? That's what utilitarianism does. They're going to choose a tax rate so that the total sum of both groups' welfare is maximized, whereas Rawls's different principle will prescribe a basic structure and its corresponding redistributive tax rate so that lag's income or wealth, right? Because Rawls's different principle is concerned about the primary goods, where in this case, income is basically used as a approximation. So here, Rawls's difference principle is going to choose a redistributive tax rate that maximizes the lowest income, lag's income and wealth level, okay? So these are the two problems that utilitarianism and Rawls's different principle are intended to solve in this setup. So that's the basic setup of the model. Any questions or anything here? Okay.
So
yeah.
So I am thinking of so the share of the mag and lag are the same. Two individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're two individuals. Yeah, you can kind of think of it like that. Yeah. So kind of like the group size is equal. More. Yeah, there's two individuals. Yeah. Yeah.
Yesterday I tried to include this model. So for operation. So I decided large n as size is operation and small n as so mags, number of mag people. So I calculated, but it was cancelled out. So risks in the process of calculation in this model. So this doesn't affect this model's conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So you say that so you are thinking about the case where the number of mag is n or something, and the number of the lag is n.
Yeah.
And then even in that case, the result is the same.
Yes.
It's
Oh, really?
Result.
So the number of like mag is
like and certain number.
Certain arbitrary natural number n, and the number of lag is mag n. Yeah. Different number. I see.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. Yes. Yeah, so let me do look at the results. I think the results are interesting, right? So basically, okay. Suppose that you, okay. Yeah, so suppose that t is sufficiently great, right? Sufficiently great, and let t be the redistributed tax rate. Then max optimal working time. So we can basically calculate the maximum working time. So we can have this, right? So mag will spend this much time, and lag is going to spend this amount of time, right? So you don't really need to kind of, the specific kind of like expression is not important. What's important is that if you look in, you can see it like both. Consider max optimal working time, and you can see that it is decreasing in t, right? What that basically means is that if we increase the redistributive tax rate, right, it will induce the higher productive group mag to work less. And that's what we will expect, right? If you increase the more productive people will work less. And now, moreover, if you kind of like take the differentiate this in terms of t, we get minus beta over 4, right? So basically, it's the sign is minus. So you increase t, the optimal working time decreases, but it's also a function of beta, meaning that if beta increases, it means that the degree to which the disincentivizing like effect increases, right? So it means that the this disincentivizing effect of the redistributive tax rate of inducing the members of work to work less is stronger the more productive they are, right? So other things being equal, if mag is more productive, they will start to work less more rapidly by increasing the redistributive tax rate t, okay? Similarly, increasing the redistributive tax rate t to work less, given that the redistributive tax rate t does not exceed 1/2. So, okay, we can see that the redistributive tax rate disincentivizes both mag and lag to work less, right? But the reason, the specific way that increasing the redistributive tax rate disincentivizes mag and lag to work less are different, right? So for mag, a higher redistributive tax rate t disincentivizes to work because a higher redistributive tax rate means that they will earn less after-tax income for the same working time, which incentivizes them to a lot more time to leisure instead of work. That's the reason why they work less. The reason why lag works less is that a higher redistributive tax rate T disincentivizes to work, because with a higher redistributive tax rate, a greater portion of MAG's earned income will be redistributed to lag, which makes it possible for lag to achieve the same level of disposable income through redistributive subsidy while working less. Right? So those are kind of like two different reasons, but they have the effect of making both groups work less. Right? MAG works less because he's going to receive less income. Right? MAG is going to work less because he doesn't need to work more, because the government is going to pay him with MAG's money, so he doesn't need to work more. All right, so the point here, the corollary of this is that after their MAGs and lags after tax income are going to be like this, okay? It's going to be this expression. And this is also kind of like interesting, is that first, you can see that the after-tax income, right, of lag is not a function of T, right? So the after-tax income of MAG is a function of T, but the after-tax income of lag is not. It's fixed at 1/4, right? So meaning that the redistributive tax rate T only affects MAGs and not lag's after-tax income, right? So regardless of T, lag is going to receive 1/4, right? So you can also see that here, MAG's after-tax income, this is also decreasing in the redistributive tax rate T, meaning that a higher redistributive tax rate T, MAG will work less, and as a result, enjoy less tangible after-tax income, right? So the point is that lag's income is going to be fixed, but if you start increasing T, the redistributive tax rate, MAG's income becomes lower and lower, right? Lower and lower. So by contrast, lag's after-tax income is fixed at 1/4. This means that any portion of income that falls short of 1/4 will be fully subsidized and financed through redistribution, taxation imposed on MAG. So implication here is that increasing the redistributive tax rate does not necessarily raise the index of primary goods. And here, index of primary goods was approximated by income. So you increase the redistributive tax rate, it does not increase the primary goods of lag, right? The amount of primary goods enjoyed by lag is fixed, and it's not affected by the redistributive tax rate. You only lower the primary goods enjoyed by MAG. That's the effect here. So nevertheless, but that does not mean, right? So although lag's primary goods income is fixed at 1/4, it doesn't mean that increasing redistributive tax rate has no effect on lag's total welfare, because it does increase lag's total welfare, not by increasing lag's income, but it does so because it increases lag's leisure, right? So basically, lag, regardless of the redistributive tax rate, is going to enjoy the same income. But with the higher redistributive tax rate, he's going to work less while enjoying the same income. So he's going to have more leisure. So the way it's going to improve lag's well-being, but not by improving the primary goods that he enjoys. It improves the total well-being by making him enjoy more leisure by working less, okay? So conversely, but you can see that if you increase the redistributive tax rate T, that is going to reduce MAG's total well-being. And the specific way that it reduces MAG's total well-being is that it's going to reduce MAG's after-tax income, okay? So that's basically the effect. So here, from this, we can calculate the redistributive tax rate that basically maximizes the total well-being, the sum of total well-being of MAG and lag. And it's going to be this, right? Utilitarian tax rate is going to be beta minus 1 over 2 beta. And Rawlsian redistributive tax rate is there's going to be a range of compatible tax rates that is compatible with Rawls's difference principle, and it's going to be less than beta minus 1 over beta, okay? So you can see that the utilitarian redistributive tax rate is uniquely determined by this number, beta minus 1 over 2 beta. By contrast, there exists a range of redistributive tax rates that would be compatible with the prescriptions of the difference principle. And among this, right, among this range, we're going to use like a T star, like upper bar R as to denote what I call the maximum Rawlsian redistributive tax rate. So it's the maximum value in this range, right? And the maximum value in this range is going to be beta minus 1 over beta. And basically, the maximum Rawlsian redistributive tax rate, beta minus 1 over 2 over beta, is the redistributive tax rate from which lag can achieve the highest total well-being under the basic structure prescribed by Rawls's two principles of justice by allowing lag to enjoy the most amount of leisure time, freedom, without reducing their disposable after-tax income, okay? So it is the tax rate that makes lag as best off as possible under Rawls's basic structure, okay? So if you kind of like say that given that leisure, of course, remember, like it doesn't increase their income. It increases the leisure. But if you kind of like interpret leisure as freedom, right? Freedom, that is an essential component to exercise what Rawls calls the fair worth of the several basic liberties guaranteed by the basic principles of justice, right? You need like leisure or freedom to exercise freedom, right? And Rawls thought that to be fundamentally important. So if we just like concentrate on the difference principle, right? Then it doesn't matter which tax rate we choose within this range because they all result in the same income. And the difference principle requires to maximize the primary goods, which is here identified as income. So any tax rate in this range is going to be compatible. But if we kind of like also consider not simply the second principle of justice, but also the first principle of justice, the liberty principle, which requires people to have the most like extensive amount of liberty and freedom possible that is compatible with all, then it would be in the spirit of Rawls to basically choose the maximum Rawlsian tax rate, because not only does it maximize lag's total well-being, not by increasing income, but also giving as much freedom as possible, right? So that if we kind of like, not just concentrate on the difference principle itself, but kind of like, look at Rawls's like two principles of justice like together, it would kind of like sort of like, my point is that it will sort of like, I think among the many kinds of like compatible tax rates for Rawls, it will basically, this is kind of like the most reasonable or kind of like tax rate that is sort of like consistent or compatible with Rawls's overall kind of like political philosophy.
This is like a lexicographic application, but it's like you are going to consider the maximum first, then you apply the freedoms.
Yeah.
It's
but it's reversed, right? You're saying that is reversed. The priority is reversed when we did do that. So according to that, we should first maximize leisure. And then
I don't think that is a good idea. So
yeah, but that doesn't matter. If we maximize leisure, like then lag is not going to work, right? And then stuff. So yeah, I think that's an interesting point, but I think it is but it's kind of like basically but also kind of like the first principle, right? The liberty principle does not concern about like how to distribute like income, right? So only like the second principle, the two principles are related. Rawls says like that there's the liberty principle, and the second principle relates to how society should regulate social and economic inequalities, right? So the liberty principle does not concern like how to do that. So, but it's kind of like, so you apply the difference principle, is this, it's not uniquely determined, there's this range, then how do we kind of like, pick the tax rate that Rawls would choose and my point is, if we kind of like look at holistically, Rawls's like overall like political philosophy, that it seems that making the worst off as best as possible, right? That's the spirit of the difference principle, right? And if we want to make the worst off as best as possible, then among this range we have to get the highest range. So that's kind of like my justification. You might kind of like criticize that. That might be a point, but that's my argument here. But the point here, you can see here that you compare the utilitarian tax rate and the Rawlsian tax rate, and you can see that Rawls is twice as high, right? The maximum Rawlsian tax rate is twice as high than the utilitarian. So it's kind of like it has more, right? So here is higher, twice as high as the utilitarian tax rate number, right? Okay, so once we do that, we can basically calculate the total well-being of mag and lag under utilitarianism. So that's like the total well-being of mag and lag under utilitarianism. And this is the total well-being of mag and lag under Rawls. Okay. And you can kind of like also kind of like look at this and the expression up here. And you can, what is that? You can see that under the basic structure organized by utilitarianism, you can see that the total well-being of both mag and lag are increasing in beta, right? So you have a higher beta, their total well-being increases, right? Both mags and lags total well-being levels increase as the productive advantage of mag relative to lag becomes greater. Further, between mag and lag, right? It's lags, not mags, total well-being that increases more rapidly. So look at this. Mag increases linearly by the increase in beta. Lags well-being increases quadratically, right? So right? So when mag becomes more and more productive, not only does it result in a higher well-being of mag, but actually it benefits lag more, right? It's the fact that mag is more productive than lag is more beneficial to lag than mag under utilitarianism, right? Under utilitarianism. Now you compare it. Now look at like Rawls. You can see that the basic structure organized by Rawls is two principal justice. It is only lag, right? Mag's total well-being does not improve by a higher productivity of mag. So by increasing mag's productivity, by increasing beta, it only has an effect in improving lag under Rawls, right? So hence there's a sense in which here, under Rawls, mag is being sacrificed for the purpose of improving the total well-being of lag, right? As mag becomes more and more productive, there's no benefit that mag is getting. Rather, his higher productivity is being translated to increasing the total well-being of lag. So he's kind of like, he's not increasing his own well-being. His talents are used to increase the well-being of the less advantaged person. Another thing to point out is that you can see, if you consider like the total well-being of lag under utilitarianism, this, and you can kind of like see the total well-being of lag under Rawls right here. You can see that if we start to increase beta, it turns out that right. If like suppose, lag starts out better off under Rawls than under utilitarianism. But if we start increasing beta and more, lag's well-being starts to increase more rapidly under utilitarianism, then it increases. It does increase in Rawls' system, basic structure, but it increases linearly, whereas lag's utility under Rawls is going to increase quadratically, like this, right? So sooner or later, if we start to increase beta more and more, there's going to be a point, right? The intuition is there's going to be a point where lag's well-being is going to surpass lag's well-being under Rawls, right? As beta increases more and more. So here's the point. Okay. So the point here is that, okay, if we just concentrate on mag is always going to be better off under utilitarianism than Rawls, right? For all values, right? It's always, there is a strict inequality right here. And the second point is the point that I just explained, that although lag starts out better off under Rawls's two principles of justice than what they would be under utilitarianism, as the members of MAG become more and more productive, the total well-being of lag increases quadratically. So it goes increases at a increasing rate, whereas it increases linearly, it increases at a constant rate under Rawls, right? So it's kind of like basically, yeah, you have a constant increase like this. So you start below, but it's going to go and it's going to surpass like that, right? From this, we can conjecture that once the relative gap between MAG's and LAG's productive abilities becomes sufficiently large, that is the members of MAG, and you can kind of interpret them as the entrepreneurs, right? That Rawls test, become more and more productive relative to the members of LAG, and these are like the unskilled workers. There's going to exist a point after which utilitarianism will start to outperform Rawls's two principles of justice in improving the total well-being of members of LAG, right? And this is actually confirmed in the next result. So here is the result. Suppose that beta is between 1 and 3, and that is the productive ability is not too great, right? Productive advantage that MAG has relative to LAG is not that great. Then we have this. The total well-being of MAG is greater under utilitarianism than it is. But you can see the point here is that the worse off, the LAG is better off under Rawls. And the MAG is better off under utilitarianism, right? So that's kind of like what we would expect normally. Yeah, you think that, oh, if you're really capable, you have high ability, you'll be better off under utilitarianism. But if you have low capability, you'll be better off under Rawls, right? So that actually confirms that our usual general intuition about these things. But this is the interesting part, right? The interesting part is that if beta is greater or equal to 3, right? So here in the model, if MAG is more than 3 times more productive than LAG, right? Then it turns out that both of them are better off under utilitarianism, right? Even the point is that, of course, no, we would expect MAG would be better off under utilitarianism, but it's not just MAG. Now, LAG is going to start to become better off under utilitarianism than under Rawls's system. So here, if beta is small within, the results simply confirm our familiar intuition. MAG is better off under utilitarianism and LAG is better off under Rawls's two principles of justice. However, if beta is sufficiently great, that is when the relative productive gap between MAG and LAG becomes sufficiently large, both, right? Not just MAG, but also LAG are better off under utilitarianism than what they are under Rawls's two principles of justice. This means that the higher redistributive tax rate, right? You remember that under Rawls, it imposes 2 times more higher redistributive tax rate, right? So the higher redistributive tax rate that is imposed on the members of MAG under a basic structure organized by Rawls's two principles of justice does not really protect the interest of LAG as it was initially designed to do, right? But instead, it simply levels everybody down, right? When the relative productive gap between MAG and LAG is sufficiently great, right? So there's no purpose that the higher redistributive tax rate that is imposed by Rawls does for the lower advantage. What it does is that it only decreases MAG's well-being, right? It doesn't increase MAG's, it does increase it, but it results in a lower total well-being than what LAG would receive under utilitarianism, right? So here, recall the principle of dominance. You have 2 options, X and Y. If option X dominates Y, then it's foolish, right? It's irrational not to choose X over Y. And we can see that the limitation of this principle is that it cannot be applied usually, right? Because there are few cases in which you're making an important decision in which one option clearly dominates another option, right? Here, we can see that when the relative productive gap between MAG and LAG is sufficiently large, the choice between a basic structure organized by utilitarianism and one organized by Rawls's two principles of justice turn out to be one of those rare decision problems to which the principle of dominance can be applied. So when the relative productive gap between mag and lag is sufficiently large, in particular, if beta is greater than 3, utilitarianism strictly Pareto dominates. Rawls's two principle of justice, as the basic structure organized by utilitarianism will generate total well-being levels that are strictly greater than those generated by Rawls's two principle of justice, not simply for mag, but for both mag and lag. And this result does not substantially change, even if we assume that the parties in the original position primarily care about securing the highest primary goods, that is income, instead of securing the highest level of well-being, right? So it dominates in both aspects. If we concentrate on total well-being, utilitarianism, as long as beta is greater than 3, it produces a higher well-being for both. So you might kind of like say, oh, the parties in the original position don't care about well-being. They care about primary goods. It still dominates. It dominates in both two different aspects, right? So the upshot is, based on the discussion so far, we can understand that given that the relative productive gap, productivity of mag is sufficiently greater than that of lag, utilitarianism simply dominates Rawls's two principles of justice, both in terms of well-being, as well as in terms of index of primary goods. So in such cases, the issue of which specific normative decision rule, it doesn't matter, right? You assume that parties will try to maximize expected utility, or you assume that they're going to maximize risk-weighted expected utility, or you're assuming that they're going to use maximum. It doesn't matter. Every normative decision rule will basically choose utilitarianism because utilitarianism simply dominates, right? The issue of the debate of which normative decision rule it would be rational for the parties to adopt becomes periphery, right? It's no longer an important issue because all the normative decision rule points converges to the same answer at this point, right? Because now the parties can rely on the principle of dominance to choose utilitarianism. And furthermore, in doing so, we are able to avoid the unnecessary controversies regarding probability assignment. You know, there's this like huge debate. You know, Harsanyi says, oh, Rawls says, oh, you can't, apply maximizing expected utility because the parties don't know probabilities, right? And then Harsanyi says, no, oh, in the case of like that, in the case of ignorance, you should rely on the principle of insufficient reason, right, to assign equal probability. So it's a deadlock assumption. Each party is just simply denying whether or not it is reasonable to assume equal probability distribution over the things. You don't need to even go into that debate, right? Because it already dominates. And an important part of the debate hinges on whether or not it would be reasonable, right? Okay, so the important part here is that, of course, the result only holds when beta is greater than 3, right? So basically, the part is that whether it would be reasonable for the original contracting parties to, based on, Rawls assumed that although the parties are behind the veil of ignorance, they still retain general knowledge of economics, like political science, like, psychology and so forth. And the point is that whether we can kind of safely think based on the general facts of human society, that the original contracting parties would think that beta is greater than 3, right? And this is an empirical issue, or something like partly an empirical issue, right? But if you look at like the human development ratio of the average income of the richest 20% of the population to the average income of the poorest 20%, which sort of like approximates to the parameter beta in the model. In the United States, it was 9.4, right? So it's kind of like it's greater than 3, far greater than 3. So in the United States, the average income that the most productive 20% makes is 9.4 times higher than the average income that the lowest 20% makes, something like that. So here's the conclusion. So unlike many research papers that have primarily taken an individual decision theoretic approach to the original position, this paper has attempted to model the economy and basic structure that allow the original contracting parties to project the economic consequences and the overall well-being of the two groups, mag and lag, as a result of living under different basic structures designed by utilitarianism and Rawls's two principles of justice. And what is important to realize that Rawls's two principles, is that Rawls's two principles of justice do not always better improve the overall well-being of lag than utilitarianism. And one value of taking, I guess, like this economic approach is that it helps us understand, right, the specific empirical conditions under which utilitarianism does outperform Rawls's two principles of justice by not only maximizing aggregate social welfare. Of course, it's not designed to maximize the total well-being of lag, but the fact that the people of lag enjoy a higher well-being level is a byproduct of trying to design a social kind of like structure in which it leads to the maximization of the total well-being. And we can kind of like the value of this kind of like exercise, I guess, is that you can sort of like see like what kind of like drives this kind of like results, what sort of like thing needs to be like satisfied that would make utilitarianism outperform Rawls's two principles of justice. And that's kind of like, once this is done, you can do that. You can resort to the academic division of labor to allow the various empirical sciences to help us understand whether our actual societies really do meet the kind of like the empirical conditions or the parameters that were sort of like assumed in the formal model, right? So that is kind of like the value that you can kind of like have by kind of like applying formal modeling into these normative questions in political philosophy. So I would strongly advise you to advise everybody in this room to kind of like start doing that. If okay, so thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Chung. So any question is welcome. So 柴田さん、柴田さんちょっと前に来てくれる。そこだと聞こえない可能性がある。
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about utility function of leisure. My question includes some calculations. So can I share my screen?
Yeah. Okay. Wait. So I should like to come in to. And then like coming to you ukshuu sanka chan. So
thank you. My question. Nice. It doesn't work.
Oh, so wait. So the Windows like this is Surface laptop have like touchscreen?
Yes.
Oh.
Do you have that kind of thing?
Yeah, because it's helpful, right? Because when you can write. Oh, okay. Oh, is that like a function for all Surface laptops?
Yeah.
I have Surface, but it's not a laptop. It's just a Surface. Oh, okay. Sorry.
L its range is defined from 0
to T, right?
Yeah. And utility function of leisure for log is
T minus L.
Is T minus L.
Yeah.
It should imply that its range is from 0 to T.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and log's optimal labor time is 1/4 minus delta T 1 minus T over 4.
Yeah.
And optimal tax rate for utilitarianism is beta minus 1 over 2 beta. And so let's plug into LL to this. So
Hmm.
It becomes it becomes 5/16 minus beta over beta square over 16.
Yeah.
So welfare of log, the contribution comes only from leisure time, but so leisure time beta can contribute to log's leisure time in utilitarianism.
So there's a cap. This implies that there's a cap in beta.
Yes.
And it cannot be over 3, right? Then it can only be below 2, about 2, right? 2 point something like that, right?
Yeah. If beta is over the square root of 5, it doesn't contribute to log's welfare. How do you feel about that?
So if beta is over square root of 2,
5. So I think it doesn't. I think it.
So if
not.
I see. So if beta is like higher than that, then the optimal this labor is going to become what, like 0? So optimal labor time is going to be 0.
Yes.
So it's going to be, and if you kind of like go up here, could you go up? Oh, up again. It's up, yeah. So here, optimal labor time is going to be 0, and it's no longer going to contribute because like it's already capped out, maxed out.
Yes.
The total.
So logs are not working
at all. So I see. So it's not increasing. As soon as like we start to increase beta and beta, mag starts to become more and more productive, then it's going to first increase lag, but after a point, it's going to be constant.
Yes.
That's a good point. You should like write that and make criticism. Yeah. Say that there is a critical. I think that's a critical point of the model. Like I overlooked that part because I thought I kind of thought that it will increase, but you can see that in this model the utilitarianism does not continuously increase the welfare of lag by the increase in beta, because it's once lag stops working, there's no welfare gain.
Yes.
Right. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
But you write that paper and send it to Economics and Philosophy or a better journal. And say that what do you call it? When what might be a good title? When utilitarian dominates. How Chung failed to show utilitarian dominates Rawls' principles of a critical flaw of Chung's model. Yeah, this is very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm impressed. So what is your name? Your name?
My name is Ryuta Shibata.
Ryuta Shibata. And what are you studying?
My main topic is about right and risk. So
right and risk. Yeah.
So
it's kind of like similar to right and risk.
So I'm interested in risk of rights violation and wrongness of that risk of rights violation.
I see. You're a doctoral student here? Master's student. I see.
From this year's April.
I see.
I will maybe.
Yeah. I see. So write the paper.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My comment is over.
Okay. Thank you.
Could you go over again? I didn't get that.
So basically, the leisure has to be within 0 to t, right? 0 to t, and you can calculate the ultimate, the basically optimal leisure time. And optimal leisure time is basically a function of beta, right? And it kind of like shows that as beta increases, the optimal leisure, optimal working time decreases, but it cannot decreases below 0, right? Because it's a non-positive number, right? So once you start to increase beta, it's going to decrease, and there's going to be a point where the optimal working time becomes 0.
So it goes below 0.
But it cannot. Right. The point is that optimal like leisure time cannot go below 0. But the way that the model makes increasing beta contribute to the lag's well-being is that it increases like leisure time. So lag starts to work less and less. So increases leisure. That's how it feeds into increasing the total well-being. But after a certain point, leisure cannot decrease. Leisure cannot increase because the working time is already 0, right? So it is capped. The amount of like well-being that can be increased, the lag's well-being can be increased, is capped by that number. And I overlooked that part. So it is not like it was like as long as beta is the square root of like 5. So it cannot go over square root of 5, right? So but the point is that the only way that utilitarianism outperforms Rawls in terms of making the least lag better off than Rawls's 2 principle of justice is when beta is over 3, right? So the cap is already reached when beta is even below 3, right? So it means that if beta is between 1 and 3, lag will always be better off under Rawls than utilitarianism. But the thing is, beta cannot go, the beta cannot go over 3, right?
I think it go over.
It can go over 3, but it contributes nothing.
Yes,
it contributes nothing to lag. The contribution stops at square root of 5.
Yes.
Right? So, but what I've shown is that this contribution beta has to be over 3 to make lag better off than under utilitarianism, than under Rawls. But the contribution, it has to be the case that beta has to be over 3, but to make it so, but what you have shown is that the contribution to lag stops at square root of 5, which is below 3. So utilitarianism never makes lag better off than he would be under Rawls' system. So Rawls' system does. So my point, yeah, I think it's
under Rawlsian principles, the cap is 0.5. Yes, so 1/2. So anyway, it quickly reaches the cap. If beta is enough big, so I think they are indifferent in terms of leisure time.
Mm-hmm. So beta, the total well-being. So the total well-being of lag is a function of his earned income and leisure, right? So leisure is capped, but does it? What's the expression? Does it still increase like lag's total well-being by increasing lag's income?
Utility from income is constant.
It's a constant, right? Yes. It doesn't increases, right?
Yes.
So it's already like fixed. Yes. Utility from income is already fixed. And then utility from leisure is kept.
Yes.
So it doesn't increase
Yes.
as we increase like beta. I think you just destroyed my paper.
So I think that my intuition is saying that it's going to be saved.
It's my paper is going to be saved. Yes, please. become.
So this is like so you are using a kind of quadratic utility function, but you are using the labor time like money because it's linear in labor time.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of tricky. So usually it's going to be the opposite way in the sense that so labor time is
the cost is going to be the increasing. If we make that, so you start to work more and more, then your leisure reduces at a rapid like pace. So it's basically making your welfare over income and both your well-being over leisure both concave, right? Both, if we kind of make it them both concave, because right now it's concave over income and linear over a thing. So maybe if that can be saved, but then you can kind of like you can do to make it. Suppose that you can. The next step might be that suppose that we try to save this by making the well-being over leisure concave, and if the same thing happens, then that is a complete destruction, right? But if it can be saved at that point, I think it's still it's a worthy point to make, and I think it's a point that can be published.
Thank you.
Yeah. So please, come back with us.
Data cannot exceed one part of the version.
Let's move to Ishida-san's question. Ishida-san, do you want to
mute space system.
He prefers to write down a question in on chat. So.
Utilitarianism.
Well, maybe you should scroll up. Yeah.
It's from your university. So okay, my question is just clarification about a potential implication of your argument that goes beyond. If beta is greater than 3, everyone benefits more from utilitarianism than from Rawlsian scheme. Yeah, that's the summary, yes. Perhaps you have already mentioned it in today's presentation and I just missed it. In that case, sorry for repeating the point. One corollary of your proposition 4 is not only that egalitarianism is less plausible than utilitarianism as the degree of natural inequality getting worse and worse, egalitarian distributive theory is getting less and less plausible compared to utilitarian theory, right? Since, increased both of them, That claim sounds somewhat surprising, is most plausible when the relevant inequality is small and the impact of egalitarianism is relatively peripheral. So my point is not to challenge your argument by appealing to the counterintuitiveness. My point is to ask whether this is the bullet you are willing to bite in this paper or not. Any thought on this point would you be thinking? So your question is, so the main point of that is as long as there is a huge gap in people's productive abilities, actually it will be better for the lower ability people to live under utilitarianism than under Rawls. So what is your point? The point is that why is this a bullet that I need to bite? What is like So I think, let me try to understand your question. Your question is that egalitarianism is more plausible when the relative gap in the productive ability is not too great? So, wait. Yeah. So the point here is that, yeah, I'm kind of like challenge the common intuition, right? Intuition. So the common intuition is you think that, you know, egalitarianism protects the low ability people. Then utilitarianism favors high ability people, right? That's kind of like we kind of like take for granted, right? And Rawls also takes for granted, right? He thinks that, and that's why he raises the separateness of persons objection against utilitarianism, because his assumption is that if we have utilitarianism, the worse off would be much worse off than they would be under his difference principle, right? And that's why we cannot justify that kind of like sacrifice for the worse off, because utilitarianism would say that, oh, you are made worse off to increase the aggregate like total well-being. And according to Rawls, that is basically kind of like doesn't take seriously the separateness of persons, right? Because the worse off have no reason to kind of like what do you call it, accept a lower level of well-being for the sake of maximizing total well-being of society, right? So that's Rawls's point, and he almost everybody in this debate takes for granted that utilitarianism results in higher variance in the sense that the lower, least advantaged person is worse off than they would be under Rawls. But I'm just wanted to show that that's not always true, right? The lower, even like the lowest person in utilitarianism might be better off than the lowest person under difference principle, which explicitly intends to maximize, right, the lowest person in society. So that's the point. Is on the degree to which egalitarianism is problematic compared to, in other words, the relative advantage of utilitarianism over egalitarianism is larger and associated with more inequality. Inequality in terms of their productive abilities, yes. Yeah. So if you kind of like say that, if you want to argue that, of course, people are not, you know, people are roughly equal, right? There's no really like significant difference between people's productive ability. The most productive person and the least productive person is not that different, right? And that's kind of like also many of like, you know, the social contract theorists assume equality as sort of like they're starting. Of course, the equality here is different. Like for Hobbes, it's kind of like, you know, equality in terms of like physical ability and physical strength, right? Physical strength. But also other egalitarians assume that there's equality in terms of like their people's moral status, right? People are morally equal. They should also be politically equal and stuff like that. But I don't think like egalitarians are committed to equality and productive abilities, right? They don't assume that people, yeah. So egalitarians assume that people are equal in many aspects, and that's the kind of like what's driving their egalitarianism. They are first morally equal, right? No person, like whether they're strong, intelligent, or something like that, have more moral value than another person, right? People's moral value are the same. In terms of like political equality, they all have like equality in front of the law, equality to kind of like influence like political decisions. That's the kind of like basic assumption of liberal democracy. So they assume that's sort of like equality, but I don't think it's a commitment of egalitarianism to assume that people are equal in their productive economic abilities, right? But I think it's not an assumption, but it's a kind of like their claim, their assertion, like the claim that society should reduce economic inequalities, right? And the main reason why that is so is that egalitarians think that if there's too much inequalities in economically, that will kind of like intrude in other spheres. So inequality in economic sphere will tend to kind of like influence and make people unequal in political decision-making powers, unequal in their like moral values and so forth. So egalitarian is best when it is, so you're asking what, so like, what happened? Okay, so on my point is just, do you think this apparently surprising conclusion? What is surprising? I just can't understand what you think is surprising. Best when it is silent. What is surprising? Like what is like what is the what is like yeah. What aspect is surprising? What can you interpret like Ishika's like question?
Yes, so as you summarize, inequalities in abilities.
Yeah.
I mean, market abilities maybe.
Yeah.
Make utilitarianism better than roses, right?
Yeah.
That's the consequence of your analysis. Based upon the reasonable setups. According to Ishida-san, that is kind of surprising because egalitarians are concerned about the inequalities in abilities, including market abilities, right? So, but I think that is what Hun already mentioned, right? There is a variety of abilities which are worthwhile of consideration, right? Then Ishida-san, what do you discuss next? I mean, at the next stage. So, could you explain this statement?
Egalitarianism is best when it is silent.
What's it? What's it? Could you explain this pronoun, the content of this pronoun, it? Well, including the
it is egalitarianism, but is silent for what?
Okay.
Silent for what? Is best. Yeah, but in terms of like what you mean by inequality, So inequality in productive people's like abilities, right? And but that is kind of like the point that Rawls already kind of like tried to utilize it, right? Right. So he says that why not just like distribute everything equally? And his kind of like point is that, oh, you know, there are people who are talented, and then kind of like and they need some like some inequality would give them incentives to develop their talent, right, in a way that benefits the least well-off person, right? Right, and that is kind of like the point that G.A. Cohen criticizes, right? Right, but Rawls kind of like accepts that there is a difference in people's abilities, right? So egalitarians are not committed, I don't think, committed to the view that people's productive abilities are equal, right? They're kind of like just saying that, you know, people's productive abilities are different, but that cannot be the basis to justify extreme inequalities, right? That's basically an egalitarian like stance. Yeah. So I don't think like egalitarians are right. Inequality in productive or inequality in natural talent. Yeah, right, exactly. So there is like a inequality. Rawls assumes that, right? People can have different natural talents, but what Rawls is denying is that the fact that you are talented does not make you deserve to have more, right? Because your talents are morally arbitrary, right? Arbitrary from a moral point of view, just like it is arbitrary for somebody to born into a rich family than a poor family. It is arbitrary that somebody was born talented and less talented, right? So you cannot justify the talented people having more like income on the basis of desert, right? So he denies that the more talented deserve more income, but he still thinks that there is some value in giving more income to the more talented, because by doing so, it actually improves the situation of the worse off, right? So in that case, he says that talent should be used as a, what do you call it, common asset, right? Communal common asset. That's super communitarian. That kind of like denies self-ownership, kind of sort of like, because, you know, oh, your talent is not yours, right? It's society can always, it's kind of like your talent is part of a common pool of resources that society can always utilize for the purpose of increasing the welfare of the least advantaged person. So that is a very, I guess, like very non-libertarian, in a sense, non-liberal kind of like assumption. Yeah, but the worse the inequality is, the less plausible.
Maybe you should scroll down to the first point.
First, on the first thought, egalitarians seem to concern about the existence of natural inequality and claim that natural inequality should be neutralized, morally speaking. Is that right? Egalitarians are committed to the view that would be something like what Parfit called telic egalitarianism, right? Mm-hmm. So not egalitarians are telic egalitarian, and telic egalitarians is a very implausible egalitarian view, even according to Parfit, because it's always subject to the leveling down objection, right? So it's kind of like basically saying, Parfit makes the kind of like case in his like paper saying that if you're a telic egalitarian, right, it means that, you know, any inequality is bad in itself, right? So if you remove inequality, there is some aspect that is good, right? Because you remove inequality. So if he kind of like gets this like perverse like example, if somebody was born with only one eye, it would be in one respect good to remove all the eyes of two-eyed people to make everybody one-eyed, right? Right. So that would be a view of like what's called telic egalitarian, and that's an implausible egalitarian view, right? Because it's subject to like the leveling down objection, because if equality has value in itself, it means that putting everybody, making everybody, if somebody is handicapped, then making like, somebody broke a leg, it will be one aspect good to break everybody's leg, right? Right. So I don't think like most egalitarians are committed to this type of teleological egalitarian view. It's something like that here. But according to your argument, the worse the inequality is, the less plausible. Yeah. So I think, So I think, people, I don't think like egalitarians think that the fact that people are more talented, naturally like talented than other people is a bad thing, right? Nobody thinks that. It is bad if that results in some sort of like inequality in political power or economic resources or stuff like that. They don't deny, right? I don't think like even like, Marxists think that it is wrong for some people to be talented, right? Because the basic motto of like Marxism is to, what is it? Like work according to one's abilities and like get according to one's needs or something, right? Each according to one's abilities, to each according to their needs, right? And that kind of like basically means that if you're really talented, you work hard. You're very smart, you study medicine, but not for the extra economic benefits, but because you're talented. But you're less talented and you're disabled, your needs are met. But the needs of the worse off people can be met only because the more talented people are working hard, not by economic incentives, but the sheer kind of like value of intrinsically thinking that their work is like rewarding, right? And Marx kind of like thinks that, capitalism kind of like, distorts people's incentives. So people start to work not for the intrinsic enjoyment of working, but for external economic benefits. And that is kind of like the problem of capitalism. So again, the point is that even Marxism does not assume that people's abilities should be equal.
So maybe Ishida-san, from the egalitarian point of view, you can provide something interesting against Professor Chang's position, but based upon the statement you summarized. But maybe it's time to have another question. So, of course, you can prepare a question on the chat. But before going to your question, further question, can we have other further questions? So, マスクしてかかった。若林さん。
若林 is like the goalkeeper and captain Tsubasa. Super great goalkeeper. So it's like people. You shoot outside the penalty area, and he catches everything outside. Sorry.
My name is Kobayashi. Master question. My concern is ideal and non-ideal theorizing. So my question is, do you think Weber can continue to be larger than 3 in a well-ordered society. Because some might doubt, because in a well-ordered society, educational or social gap can shrink, and
so
maybe there can be some kind of gap of ability, but in ideal condition, the gap is such a large gap.
So you're saying that the well-ordered society would not permit such a huge. So beta is kind of like a gap, income gap.
Yeah, and if this is a very controversial empirical fact about human nature, maybe insist that you can't use this controversial fact within public reason. So what do you think about it?
So you think like assuming that beta could be large is a controversial assumption? So in a well-ordered society, doctors should not be paid that high? Does a well-ordered society, the conception of a well-ordered society imply that? Do you think so? So if it's like the doctors cannot receive more than 3 times of a manual laborer, right? In a well-ordered society, do you think that is medical doctor? Oh, not a doctor of philosophy. Yeah, of course. A medical doctor, right? You think that is an implication of a well-ordered society?
I don't see it correct. But within public reasoning, that kind of controversial fact cannot be.
Is it controversial? I mean, like it is a kind of like a factual claim, right? It might be contradict empirical facts. It might turn out that some people are not 3 times as capable to produce income than a low-skilled worker, right? But what is like controversial? I mean, like it is either true or false, right? Either people's productive abilities are great, or their productive abilities are not so great, right? But it is it's sort of like the question that can be settled by empirical like facts, right? But I kind of like suggested, of course, it depends on that. But if you look at like the UN development like report and stuff like that, the proportion, right? The average income of the most productive 20% is more than 9 times higher in the US. Of course, then you can say that, oh, US is not a well-ordered society, right? But even like you do that, the lowest country is still like over 3. Yeah. So then you can then say that, you know, none of the countries in this current non-idealistic world is a well-ordered society. So you say that in a well-ordered society, you would then have to sort of like argue that somehow like beta is like capped below 3 or something like that. But I think that would be more controversial than what my assumption is.
Yeah, I think beta is increasing according to the empirical works in economics.
Yeah.
So the idea is simple. So it's like so let's suppose that we get some technological change. It's like we get a new computer, which is super powerful, and then the high-skilled worker is getting more advantage, while the low-skilled worker do not get a lot of advantage based on this kind of technological change. So beta is increasing. So actually, this is a major driving force of the increase of the inequality in after the 1980s. So beta is increasing everywhere.
So you're saying that as technology advances, the beta also increases.
Yes.
And that is like partly what also drives technological advancement.
Right.
Because people must have like to advance technology, they have to be incentivized.
So I'm saying that if you want to have a low beta, you have to give up the laptop or iPad or something like that.
So my question concerns the distinction between well-being and the primary goods, in which you introduced on page on the paper page 12. Note 18, you say many people conflate well-being and the primary social goods. And I think your surprising result partly comes from this distinction, because you construe Rawlsian difference principle as a principle that seeks to maximize the income or primary goods of the lags, the less advantaged group, which I think is correct interpretation of the Rawls. But one could also interpret the difference principle as the principle that seeks to maximize the well-being of the lags. But then I think your results doesn't hold in this case, because that principle by definition maximizes the well-being of the lags. So the utilitarianism does not.
If utilitarianism turns out to maximize that would be equivalent to what Rawls's difference principle would prescribe if it is applied to people's well-being, right?
Right. But then utilitarianism does not dominate the Rawlsian principle, right? Is my understanding right? So my first question is, what will be the result when you compare utilitarianism with this well-being approach, Rawlsian difference principle? And my second question would be, can Rawls revise his theory so that he seeks to maximize the well-being, not primary goods of the less advantaged group?
I think you're right. I think like part of the implausibility of Rawls does depend on the fact that it is focused on primary social goods, and then many people have raised criticism against that. Like for example, like Amartya Sen criticized Rawls's reliance on primary social goods because he said that Rawls was being resource fetishist, right? So what Amartya Sen said is like, what we care about is what primary goods are resources, right? And he says that what we care about is what the resources actually does for people, not the resources themselves, right? But kind of like Amartya Sen says that Rawls was kind of like being fetishistic to kind of like fixating of like maximizing resources instead of like what it does, or like human functioning or like well-being and stuff like that. So people kind of like criticize that aspect, and that aspect is also what sort of like kind of like partly drives the implausibility of the results. So yeah, I think that if you really want to, if Rawls really wants to actually make Rawls' difference principle kind of serve the initial purpose that it was designed to serve, it should be applied to well-being instead of resources, right, or primary goods. So I think that is the thing that should be done. But Rawls himself kind of like he also has arguments that that makes there's a reason why he does not do that, right? So and one of the reasons is that he thinks that interpersonal comparison of well-being is problematic. So part of the reason that drives Rawls to rely on primary social goods is to make he needs interpersonal comparisons, right? To apply, because in order to apply Rawls' difference principle, you need at least like level comparability, right? You need to compare how well off people are at different levels, right? And that requires interpersonal comparison, but he thinks that you cannot do that in terms of people's utility or well-being. So in order to do that, he wanted to make some sort of like an objective measure of people's advantage that can be interpersonally compared for him to apply the difference principle. And that's why he relied on primary social goods. But I think by doing so, it made it very implausible.
But then if Rawls revises his theory, then utilitarianism does not dominate his theory anymore, right?
I would have to kind of like see, but I think under his assumption in which like utility for income is strictly concave and stuff like that, it either coincides with utilitarianism or it will. I think it will. So I'm not completely sure about that, but yeah, I think under that assumption, is it possible to increase like the total utility with a lower well-being of the least well-off? Do you think that's possible? It's not sure, but yeah. But if it is like very like concave, right? It is always better to take some resources from the rich to give it to the poor. So if it's like utility is concave, the amount of utility that is lost by taking away the resources from the rich is less than the amount that the utility that the poor people will gain by that. So it's going to have a very strong tendency towards an egalitarian distribution.
Yeah, I need to think about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, can I ask another question? So this is kind of a clarification question, but like you seem to be presupposing a kind of like free capitalist society in which people can decide like how many hours they will work and how many hours, right? But is this this is a plausible assumption, but is this like legitimate? Because I think part of concern that Rawls raised against utilitarianism is that maybe utilitarianism can deprive the less advantaged group of people from like basic liberty and maybe like economic liberty and the basic rights and stuff. So if one is to evaluate the basic structure of society, maybe one cannot presuppose that the society is a capitalist one. So are you kind of like assuming this?
So people are not free to work?
I mean, that's
to use their leisure time?
That's possible implication of utilitarianism, right? I mean, like possible.
Oh, it's possible only when by restricting people's like freedom to work according to their optimal levels would actually maximize total social welfare.
And that's empirical Christian. So,
but it will never. It will never happen.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So that's your assumption, right? I mean, that's plausible. Yeah, I was just.
Yeah. So basically, Yeah, yes. I mean, like, just kind of like you.
Like, only thing you consider is like how much tax the government imposes on people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that seems to be a very narrow range of like alternate possibilities that society can take as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So that you only concern like how much tax rate, distribute tax rate that society should impose. Like there are many other like possible forms of government that one society can endorse. So maybe those possibilities are kind of ruled out from the outset in this paper.
Yeah, so it kind of like concentrates on one specific aspect.
Right.
So we're kind of assuming that the society is going to have a redistributive tax rate.
And then the first principle and legislative priority, you don't have to answer that kind of question, such as restricting people's freedom and rights. So we compare with the utilitarianism and difference principle, or utilitarianism with.
So the basic the distribution has to like the economic that is like the difference principle regulates economic inequalities and so forth, right? But I think briefly kind of like explained how, in determining the Rawlsian, like what tax rate Rawls will choose, we also considered like the other principles to kind of like give some justification of why we should kind of like, choose the maximum Rawlsian tax rate rather than the lower one. So the other principle, not just simply this difference principle, the other principles are kind of like taken into consideration in sort of like the analysis of the results. But the primary focus was the distributive comparison between utilitarianism and the difference principle.
My questions are about the plausibility of several assumptions in the paper. My first question is about the plausibility of classifying people into two groups in the paper. I mean, classifying into lag and mag. Probably the level of productivity or the level of wage can be represented by more scales. I mean, gradation, not by mag and lag. So I do understand the top 20%, the productivity of top 20% in the United States, 9.3, 9.4 times larger than the lowest 20%. But I wonder if we compare the second lowest and 20% and the worst 20%. Does that sort of manipulation change the results of the analysis? So my concern is about classifying people into two groups in the analysis.
The first point is that Rawls himself classifies people into two groups.
Just two?
In his book, when he kind of like tries to exemplify his model. So sometimes there are like three, but mag and lag, the term itself is coming from Rawls himself.
Thank you.
So it's something, it's not, it's, if you think that is problematic, you're also thinking Rawls was problematic. and then the point is that if you if you kind of like the point you're comparing like the next worst off and stuff like that. But the point is that if as long as the gap, the productive gap is over like 3, then utilitarianism is better. Of course, it turns out that it might not, because there is a cap that the higher productivity would actually benefit the low productivity time. But, yeah.
Thank you. The second question is about about whether you assume that tax rate is the same across population, both under Rawlsian principles and utilitarian principle. I mean, I know the tax rate is different between Rawlsian principle and utilitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
In my, as far as I can see in the paper, the tax rate is the same across the population under one principle, under a certain principle.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Huh?
So do you consider progressive taxes or?
Yeah, the tax is only imposed to MAG. Lag income is not taxed.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is kind of like similar to sort of like, I don't know. Yeah, lag is tax exempted, and lag only receives subsidy from the government. That is being financed by the taxes collected by MAG.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Probably this question is related to the first question, but I mean, in many modern societies, many countries adopt progressive tax. Mm-hmm. So we can change the tax rate by, I mean, in terms of.
Yeah. So if you can.
So,
well, but as long as the tax is levied on MAG's income.
Yeah.
And then the tax collected gets transferred to lag, and you kind of like assume that as MAG's income increases, the tax rate goes up. That will not change the results substantially. Right?
So this model is a special case of the progressive tax system.
Yeah.
Because the value is not taxed and the money is taxed. So I think it's a kind of approximation of the real situation.
So you can generalize to other.
Maybe, yeah.
It's kind of like the extreme case.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you're kind of like wondering, like, so low income people are taxed, like income tax, right? There are income brackets usually in the country. So if you're below a certain like annual income is below, your tax is exempted. Your next bracket, you're kind of like tax 5%, like then 10%. If your income like exceeds this, it's like 25, like 30. There are these kind of things, right? Based on income brackets, people have different taxes. Right? And that is kind of like a case of like a progressive tax that you're talking about. But in the extreme case, right? In the extreme, if there are two groups, there's a high income group and low income group, and there's no tax for the low income, and tax is only imposed on the high income group. That would sort of like approximate progressive taxation. Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's time to close. Thank you very much for participants, all of you, who contributed to great discussion.
Yeah.
And many thanks must go to Professor Hun Chung,
thank you.
who gave a great lecture. 名前出るから、島田さん、you should write a reply paper, okay? That's your next task. Okay, good. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. で、この後懇親会は、ジョン先生も、加藤さん、もう行きますんで、ぜひ、参加してほしいんですけども、参加したいという人います。手を挙げてください。じゃあ、1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8だね。で、OK。じゃあ、教えてもらった。ここどう
ちょっとあれかもしれないですね。
もうちょっと6人ぐらいだとか。
そうですね、6人ぐらいだと多いと思うんですけど、入ってなければ入れますけどね、多分、いけたらオプションがあると思います。
8人で、これから7時半ぐらいに行けるか、7時半はちょっとあれか。7時半過ぎない行けるかっていうのちょっと確認してもらっていいか。私、こういうのをやらないと。
So I should like cancel, like hide, yes, recording.
Yes.